Well, today, guys, I have a very special guest with us. I have Dr. Rollin McCraty from the HeartMath Institute. He is one of their lead researchers and has been instrumental in unlocking the potential of the heart over the last 30 odd years now. Is that right, Rollin?
Yeah, about 30 years. Yeah.
Amazing. As we discussed through some of the coursework, there's a brilliant concept of heart-brain coherence, and Rollin has played an instrumental role in the science in understanding how this can create greater levels of peace and harmony within our body, and how that allows us to tap into greater levels of intuition, resilience, and create more capacity for life. So today, I really want to dig into this with you, Roland, some of your findings and just the benefits of coming and parenting and living from a heart-centered space.
Great. Do you have any particular questions, or how do you want to guide this conversation? Because it could go a million different ways.
Yeah, well, I would love to understand just a little bit of a background on your research, and maybe starting with your definition of that heart-brain coherence and maybe how we can get into those states.
Well, that's a tough one to give a definition, but basically coherence is a term when we use it in science and physics to describe the harmonious order of the parts of a complex system. In other words, and for that to be true, the parts of a system were like a living system, like us, right? Or any living system are extremely complex systems across many scales, right? So when you think about it, all the different, from the atoms becoming cells to cells becoming organs to organs all having to work together, to consciousness like we have is a phenomenal feat. In fact, one of my colleagues who's recently passed away, May-Wan Ho, actually defines living systems as quantum coherent systems.
Wow.
But anyway, coherence really describes how well are all those parts of a system working together, right? And it implies energy efficiency, and something greater than the sum of the parts emerges in a coherent system. So that's not a simple definition, but I thought I'd give a little bit of background of what do we mean by coherence to begin with. Now, when we talk about heart-brain coherence, it turns out that the human heart and the brain are interconnected more tightly and tightly coupled than any other systems in our body. In fact, the heart sends more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. You might have read that in some of my writings, and that's like a big aha, it can't be true for a lot of people when I first heard that. But this is not some new discovery. This has been known since the 1800s. It's basic anatomy. So to kind of give a little more relevance to Christopher, to that story, long before I came along, and I'm a psychophysiologist, is my current background. I was a communication engineer in my first life around this time, so to speak. The signals, or I'll just say, to keep it a little bit simpler, the quality of the neural information being sent through the nerves from the heart to the brain profoundly affect mental functions and even our emotional experience, right? So hopefully this is probably mostly guys watching this, right? If it's about,
yes.
Right. So hopefully you didn't ask your wife to say, when you asked her to marry you, I love you with all my head, right? We just don't do that. That probably wouldn't get us very far. But anyway, the quality of the neural traffic going from the heart to the brain, two terms were given to describe the effects on brain function. And this is going back into the early 1970s. So there's a long history here. And one is called cortical inhibition, and the other is cortical facilitation. Right, so the cortex, top part of our brain, the part that we get paid to go to work from, and it's also critical in our capacity to self-regulate, which is really the big game here. So when the heart rhythms are what we call incoherent, right, which is what naturally happens when we're feeling things like frustration or impatience, right? Not that us men ever feel things like impatience and
No.
No, we don't. We don't have emotions, right?
Yeah.
No, Joe. Yes, we do. Of course, we do. We like to deny them and kind of disassociate sometimes, but they're still there, and they still have the same effects. So, in other words, we know a lot about the mechanisms of this now. So when we are feeling those kind of emotions, frustration, irritation, impatience, so on, that creates a desynchronization in our neural structure, in our neural systems. I mean, literally a measurable, the neural systems get out of sync with each other. And that's why it leads to the term that was coined many years ago, cortical inhibition. So you might ask, I'll just ask you, Christopher, have you ever had a situation? Well, you up for an honesty test?
Absolutely.
All right. Have you been in a situation where you might have gotten a little frustrated or even angry with somebody, maybe your spouse, or it could be your kids or a colleague, whatever, and you found yourself blurting something out that a minute later you were saying to yourself, oh my God, I can't believe I just said that or did that. I didn't really even.
Absolutely. There's like, I put both hands up.
This isn't the honesty test. How have you done it more than once with the same person around the very same issue?
Yes, I have. Absolutely.
Cortical inhibition, right? I mean, that usually creates more stress, more separation, more mess we have to clean up when we do that. That's a great classic example of day-to-day life cortical inhibition.
That's fascinating, Rollin. The reason, I find that so fascinating because throughout this series, we've talked about how our beliefs and perceptions, the way we think, can actually dictate our levels of coherence. And what you're talking about there, we're trying to reframe that as an opportunity to maybe look at a belief or perception that doesn't serve us anymore if we're reacting opposed to responding.
Right. Perfect. Let me finish that story and then we'll circle back to that because that's an awesome place to go in the story. When the heart rhythm is what we call coherent, and this is where a picture's worth 1,000 words, and I think some of the resources we have for your listeners might help show pictures of this. But when we're in a heart rhythm coherent state, that neural signals actually increases neural synchronization across the whole brain. So suddenly we get a lot smarter. Yeah. We have faster reaction times, better coordination. That's why athletes love our stuff. They do and law enforcement. We work with the Navy SEALs because it really optimizes our ability to perform at our best. But not only like motor skills and things like that, but really it's our higher brain functions. So that's why the term cortical facilitation was coined. So we're actually able to make better choices than we are in our normal walking around state if we're in that coherent state. So the key is to be able to shift from incoherence to coherence in the heat of the moment. So here at HeartMath, we focus a lot on, not that there's nothing wrong with meditation and these types of skills, but really it's our capacity to self-regulate ourselves when in the heat of the moment. I almost said it another way, but I'm going to be a little more polite. I'm used to working in military and law enforcement circles a lot, but that's when it counts. I kind of a common example. We're driving our car, we're off to a meeting or somewhere, and hey, the traffic lights are all green. We're hitting them just right. There's the parking spot. We pull right up. It's all great, right? Yep. Easy to be in flow and kind of, it's all good, right? But it's when we hit the traffic jam and we're late. What happens? Right? For most people.
Yeah, most people get frustrated. They get angry,
Yeah, that's that moment, right? Right there that I'm talking about, that where we have a choice point. Now, getting angry, impatient and all that, does that make the traffic move any faster?
It does not.
It does not. So but what it does do is sets in motion at least 1,400 biochemical changes in our body just from a few minutes of being frustrated, not even full out angry, that deplete our energy and increase the aging process. Right? So is that very intelligent? Is that intelligent use of our energy? I would say probably not. Right? So I use traffic jams because we've all had that, but now it's not just traffic jams. You think of all the interactions we have in life where things don't go the way we want and we tend to get frustrated or irritated, and especially us guys can
Absolutely.
do that.
Well, and that's that's such a great analogy, Roland, because we want to empower men as well to understand that they have choices, which is going to dictate their internal state. So really taking responsibility for our internal state and looking at how that can affect our world. Because maybe we can't affect that traffic jam, but by staying more heart-centered, we're not going to, as you said, deplete our energy and age ourselves just because we're going to be late,
Yeah, and say dumb things if we happen to be on a phone call because we got frustrated and we're talking to somebody. But I want to take it out of just traffic. I mean, it's going to be a staff meeting. It could especially be interactions with our family or kids. You know, so you said something a minute ago that wanted to circle back to. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about some neurophysiology here because I think it's really helpful. At least it was for me. And I am a parent, by the way. I have a now adult son. So I needed the T-shirt. I survived.
Yeah. I think, I'm only 18 months into the journey, and I'm realizing that my capacity for coherence gets tested a lot, and it's an opportunity to build capacity through the parenting journey.
Oh, absolutely. It's a great. In fact, most marriages fall apart in the first year after the first child. And the statistics are very clear on that. That's because of the stress, of bringing a new life into the world and all that goes along with that. So it's and usually most parents at that age, their first child, are a little bit younger. They haven't really developed the maturity to understand how to self-regulate and the importance of this. But what I wanted to share here is that there's a part of our brain called the amygdala. And it's in the news a lot, has been for a few years now, the amygdala. And it gets painted in a lot of the media circles as a bad guy, the fear center, these kinds of things.
Yes.
That's not what the amygdala is. Let me set the record straight. What the amygdala does is it determines what is familiar and what is not familiar. Okay, now it's a really important concept to understand, especially in the role of parenting, as I'll try and explain this. So it's doing this from the body's internal systems, what we call interoception, all the body sensory systems, which are sensing hormones and heart rate and all these different rhythmic patterns in the body, and also from everything we perceive from the external world. What we smell, hear, all these different things. See, of course. So for the amygdala to do that, to determine familiar or not familiar, and it's doing this very rapidly in real time, you have to have a reference to compare the now to. And that's what we call the internal baseline reference. Once we have a baseline established, the brain's always comparing, and what the brain wants, what it makes it happiest at, just to say it kind of in a very simple language, is a match, and that is comfortable. Okay? Yep. Match means comfortable. Here's the problem. When we can have baselines that get established, that what are technically we would call maladapted baselines, right?
Yep.
All people who wear blue shirts are bad. You can probably get where I'm going. Right?
I get it totally. Yes.
So maybe we got bullied by somebody who wear blue shirts all the time.
Yep.
So that establishes a familiarity that we associate with. Right. So everything we see somebody with this is a kind of absurd example, but you get why I'm probably using this one.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
It's in group, out group. It's all kinds of things are based on this very thing I'm talking about. Or if we see dad, when a challenge happens, reacting in a certain way through frustration or, bullying or, even if it's emotional.
Yes.
We're establishing that as a baseline in that child. Right, in a very powerful way. So we're actually have a lot to do with establishing the baselines in our kids. Right.
So with that then, Rollin,
where I'm going. So once that baseline's set, man, that's the whole brain takes off from that for the rest of life until we have to do some really much harder work to unlearn that stuff. And I would say for a lot of new dads, that's the thing that we really should be focusing on is really ourselves right now and really looking at our own biases and our own baselines. And because not just kids, even our peers and stuff, when we run into challenges, that micro reactions we have in that moment is a grand opportunity. And it's how we get judged by our peers and not necessarily judged by our kids, but it's how we establish baselines in now.
Yes.
Am I making sense? You know where I'm going here?
You are. And that's like we talk about our whole first lesson was on beliefs and perceptions, establishing those first 3 and then 7 years of life based on as you said, it could even be the emotional imprinting of dad and mum. And I know you talk about the the electromagnetic and the magnetic pull of the heart. And so, my understanding is children can't speak verbally for quite a while, but emotionally we are imprinting them through our own,
Oh,
the
absolutely.
vibe we're putting out,
Well, yeah, and a lot of it's our own reactions, right? I mean, usually it's moms, but dads are also important here in the first years of life. We're really our primary mom's primary role, but dad too. That take away this. Typically, moms spend more times are actually teaching the child how to self-regulate.
Yes.
Mom actually is having to self-regulate not only herself but the child until they learn their skills. And there's some amazing research on this that I don't think is well known as it should be. I mean, it's really solid research over many, many years. And this is where they actually do heart rhythm monitoring of babies and the caregiver.
Huh.
And what they have found is that there is an exquisite degree of synchronization between the heart rhythms of the caregiver, usually moms, and the baby. I mean, they're in sync at a very fine-tuned level, right? As we kind of co-regulate with them. And what this research has found, though, is without that literal synchronization, that biological, physiological synchronization, that child does not have the baselines, is what I would say. They don't have those inner references for a future capacity to socially engage well with others and self-regulate. So it sets them on a trajectory for life. You probably know about the ACEs study and these types of things. You probably interviewed somebody about that, but
no, I haven't yet. No.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that's a whole different topic. That would take us to another thing, but it's probably worth looking into. That's called it's the Childhood Adversity Study.
Okay.
Which was a shock. It really changed a lot of people's perspective. It was done by Kaiser Permanente, a huge, huge study, thousands of adults looking back into the childhood experience.
Yes.
And then correlated that in a very powerful way to how healthy we are in adulthood.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest intentions of this course is to empower dads to look at their own upbringings, not from a place of judgment, but to set new baselines, to start to understand that they do play such a huge role in their own child's life, and that there's a responsibility to actually have a look at our beliefs and see if they serve,
Yeah, but the reason I wanted to explain what the amygdala and familiar, not familiar, and baselines is that's what underlies our perceptions and our beliefs and our worldviews, usually at an unconscious level. So once you really understand this, it can kind of help us look a little bit deeper under the radar, not just out of do good, right, or should, because that never works.
Absolutely.
So once we really understand at our own neurophysiology how our own internal baselines might have got set, which underlie all of our perceptions at an unconscious level, right? Like blue shirts are bad.
Yes.
Probably when we got bullied or whatever that incident was. I'm using metaphor, not really metaphor, it's real stuff, but
yep.
That is an unconscious imprint that we probably don't even remember.
Yes.
But yet it's biasing us for the rest of our life unless we can somehow intervene and reestablish a more healthy baseline.
Yeah. And that's what we're trying to empower men with, to understand that they can reset a baseline.
Absolutely.
Just because we've been that way doesn't mean we'll always be that way. I love the physiology behind that.
Well, here's the kicker. And this is just so fundamental that everybody, I think, on earth should understand this, and maybe will someday. And one of my mentors, a guy named Dr. Carl Pribram, he was a very famous guy in the neurosciences, is considered by many the father of modern cognitive neuroscience. I mean, he's a legend in this. And unfortunately, I got to know him very well. We were very close friends. He spent a lot of time here over the years. What he actually proved was that the only way to establish an internal baseline is to change the inputs to the brain from the body, especially the heart. Now, this is why heart coherence is so important. Is when we're able to get into a coherent state, we're directly, in fact, the core cells in the amygdala are literally synchronized to the heart.
Wow.
So when we're in a coherent state, we're directly impacting the amygdala. So if we practice coherence often enough, that establishes that as our new inner reference, as our new baseline. It's such a critical thing. And if we are practicing some of like the HeartMath techniques, where we're shifting, like doing heart focused breathing, like we start to feel that frustration or that, I can't believe they said that. How dare they in a meeting or whatever, those types of feelings and how those typically play out. Right in that, we want to learn the skill right in those moments. First step is usually heart focused breathing. And that's an important part. We call it heart focus for a reason. Focus your attention right here in the center of your chest. Pretend you're breathing right through this, to the center of your chest. It's a little bit slower and deeper than normal, about 5 seconds on the in-breath, 5 seconds on the out-breath. Now, what happens when we do that is we can consciously intervene with our breathing. And breathing, I won't go through all the neurophysiology, but it literally modulates the heart rhythm. So when we breathe at that rhythm, that is shifting the heart rhythm into our own natural resonant frequency, which is what we call coherence, which is changing the inputs to the brain. So it's grandma's wisdom in a way.
Yes.
Right. If a kid falls down, scrapes their knee, and they're screaming and crying, you pick them up. Make sure there's not blood squirting out or something, that they're okay, right? But what's grandma usually do? Breathe, honey. Take a few breaths. Breathe with me. Because instinctively knows that until they calm down, right, they're not going to be able to get a hold of themselves or be able to hear anything because they're
Yeah. I wonder.
State.
Yeah, I want to touch on something too. You talk about that maladaptation of the response, and we discussed it before that, just because it's our normal doesn't mean it's natural. And
or healthy.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I use the analogy of looking at an animal, looking at their autonomic nervous system and the fight or flight versus the rest and repair. And I'd love your perspective on it, because I feel when I look at animals in nature, 95% of the time they are in a coherent state. Yet, they use their fight or flight for that real danger. However, I feel as humans, we've maladapted that behavior, that through work, through the stresses of our jobs, through our lives, we get triggered very easily. And because it's our normal, we're unconscious to the fact that we're running in the red zone at all times, and that we are aging ourselves, that we're not in our higher centers, that we can't tap into that intuition and make higher decisions.
Yeah. Well, a lot of what you're saying actually ties right back to what I've been talking about, baselines. Right. In other words, if our baseline has become, the high stress work type thing, right, that becomes the familiar. It's what's comfortable. Right. And we don't even know what's happening.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, it's kind of like the frog in the boiling water, right? Analogy. But it is like that. So fight, flight. So we hear a lot about fight, flight, right? This is a concept introduced in the late 1920s, early 1930s by a guy named Walter Cannon, by the way, to describe the activity or what happens when but it's really not the nervous system. It's what we do up here above the nervous system. So it's really back to the pattern matching, the fight, the familiar, not familiar. We encounter something that's not familiar. It could either go two ways. Something is not familiar. Okay, I use another example here. We're in a new city, right? We traveled, and it's an unknown area. It looks kind of dodgy.
Yeah.
We're kind of on guard a little bit, right? We're vigilant while we navigate, kind of find where we have to go and get settled in and all of that. It gets unfamiliar. Once we're there a while, we get to know the area, right? And the people, hey, this is pretty safe, and this is okay over here. And so we've now gained familiarity, and we have a positive reference to that familiarity, right? That, we go out and go down that street and we feel safe. We're not, after we've gained that familiarity. Now, had we got mugged, right, or ran into something that really caused us some serious stress in our early encounters of this new area, we have a very different reference, right? Which is going to last for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Follow where I'm going?
Yes.
But that's what triggers the fight flight. It's really based on familiar, not familiar, and what the past reference is. So I hope this is going to be helpful for people. If you can really grok what I'm trying to say, it's profound and brings in a lot of compassion for people. I'm going to get back to the nervous system, but in my own life, I had one of my grandmothers was I mean, quite literally, if she wasn't worried about us kids, in her world, she wasn't caring about us.
Yes. Yeah, that's a belief for sure.
Yeah, what's more than a belief, that was her familiar, was worry. And that was, remember what I said, when you have a match to the familiar, the reference, that's what we experience as comfortable.
Yes.
So the highly anxious or the workaholic, that's the familiar that equals comfort, even though it can be completely inappropriate and unhealthy. So that's triggering the nervous system. It's really above it. But we blame this bad guy sympathetic nervous system. That's what the fight flight is describing. And if you read a lot of even today, I have a kind of a personal beef with this. So you probably get my tone here. You know, if you're going to manage stress, the message is you have this bad guy sympathetic nervous system. We're fighting or flighting, fight or flight, and we have to learn how to relax. That's usually the core message, right? Meditate, do something to relax. Okay. Okay. Well, not really. It's not quite the whole story. So a lot of what people are describing is as humans that we really only have fight, flight, or now freeze gets added responses.
Right.
But it's just nonsense. As humans, we have many other behavioral responses than fighting or fleeing.
Yes.
We have what's called the social engagement system. And that's what gives rise to that is the parasympathetic or the vagal, often called the vagus nerve, which is the main nerve of the parasympathetic system. But it's the parasympathetic that allows us to self-regulate. Right. So, you and I may disagree on something, but I don't have to hit you or run away from you.
Yes.
Right, Christopher? I mean, we could say, well, wait a minute, let's talk this out. I mean, we really can. So that's what the social engagement system does is it allows us to inhibit our responses. So it's really one of the fundamental underlying neurophysiological underpinnings of our capacity to self-regulate. So in other words, it's not just fight or flight. In fact, for most people, the skill that most needs to be developed for the majority of the world isn't that we have a stuck accelerator like the fight flight. It's that we really haven't developed our brakes, right? Our capacity to put on those brakes and self-inhibit. There's that trigger, the traffic jam of life, whatever that is. Well, we get into these habit patterns of familiar reactional patterns. That's the familiar.
Yes.
Right? Like maybe we grew up in a household where dad yelled, clean up your room or you're going to get it, right? Or whatever it was. I did. Yeah. So that we were developing that as the familiar. What did we then carry into our parenting?
The familiar.
Because it was familiar.
Yeah.
Right. So dad learned, if I yell loud enough, I'm successful in getting what I want with my kids. This actually really happens. That becomes a familiar.
Absolutely does. Yeah. We're the reward response. And then
now what can happen with that, Dad, and I can testify to this from my own previous experience, is that these are implicit or unconscious processes. If I yell at my colleague at work loud enough, I'll probably get the way I want. It doesn't work there so well.
Yes.
Right. And he creates, but that's because of this, this is like when we become bullies and stuff like that, this is what's underlying that. So I have a lot of compassion now for, the bullies of life.
Yes.
It's a lack of not only maturity, but they really probably, if you look back in their history somewhere, they had a reference set that equals, somehow feeling good or success and that kind of thing.
Yes.
I keep going off track here, but so the main thing is when we learn how to develop coherence practices, we're really developing that vagal side, that parasympathetic side in our capacity to self-regulate. So when we get coherent, not only are we synchronizing all the neurons in our brain, which facilitates the prefrontal area of our brain, where, that's what gives us what I would call foresight. I mean, that's the thing that our beloved animals and pets don't have.
Absolutely.
They have wonderful memory of hindsight. If you treat a horse bad or a dog, they remember it, for a long time. But they don't have foresight, in at least not in the way we do. So foresight's a big thing. It's a big umbrella that allows us to determine or discriminate appropriate behavior. Because with that, we can understand how our behaviors in the now affect the future. Foresight. If I want to keep my job, I probably shouldn't hit the boss, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm using kind of gross examples, but
No, I love it. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, but it's so true. Or setting goals, or even appreciating that we accomplished the goal. This is all foresight, abstract thinking.
Yes.
So these are the neural machinery, the same centers in the brain that, based on the foresight, allow us to self-regulate. So when we're incoherent, we get angry, upset, frustrated, we get in that incoherent state, we take those centers offline, we do the stupid thing.
Yep.
Right? Whereas if we can learn to pause, and it can be fast, we just have to learn, oh, there goes that signal, that feeling.
Yes.
Right then, breathe. And then shift, we have many techniques like attitude breathing, would be a great one for many dads. Quick coherence and so on. Freeze frames, another one that would be really appropriate for, I think, use in family life, where we can make that shift from incoherence to coherence, inhibit that immediate unconscious programmed response, right? Yelling or whatever it is, or, that goes to facial expressions. And so we can self-regulate that, and we can have a very, I would say, oftentimes much better response, more appropriate response that actually leads to better outcomes.
Amazing. That's one of the keys, once again, we want to get across to fathers is by utilizing techniques like, as you said, the quick coherence technique, that you're going to open up that intuition. And we're really fostering dads to understand we have intuition just as much as mums.
Oh, yeah.
You hear mother's intuition, all good and well. I understand there's an intimate bond between, as you said, a caregiver, the primary caregiver in mum, and a baby or a young one. But we really want dads to understand that they're able to tap into these higher faculties as well and be able to parent from a place where they can make higher decisions, as you've said, with foresight, opposed to a very narrow, focused, incoherent decision making.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've covered this already in your series or your program, but kids are at all ages, really, but not just when they're infants and babies, and that's why I wanted to talk about this baseline stuff, are sponges, as a word that is often used. They are monitoring us and our behaviors, and that to a much larger degree than we often realize as parents, establishing those baselines for our children that oftentimes will last a lifetime. We're programming them.
Yes.
Based on largely our unconscious, unknown to us and unconscious attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. And they can be small things that can have profound influences on kids. So that's where I think it's so important for us to look at our own maladapted baselines and
yes.
behaviors, and really kind of make working on ourselves as one of the probably more important things that we can possibly do, because it's, I can see it in my own life. Even today, some of the things that I would tend to say, think, believe, but I have to kind of, wait a minute, that's not really me, yes. was based on my father. Right? And dads have a huge, huge influence. It's not just, moms probably on average, but it can be dads just as much in those early couple of years.
Yes.
But from then on, dad has, whether it's girls or boys, a profound influence.
Absolutely. I did have a question. When you were talking about the amygdala before and that baseline, can we reset our baseline to be comfortable in the uncertainties of life?
Oh, sure we can. I'm kind of one of those people. I'm comfortable with ambiguity. Where some people, some of my colleagues, if they don't have all the answers to how something's going to work out, they're anxious. They're really distraught, some of them, about it.
Yes.
But it's their baseline. I'm a little bit more of a, I think probably a lot of it is again, but I'll have to give my dad credit for. One of the, positives, not just negative things, some really positive things. I grew up on a small farm, actually, when I was a young child in the Midwestern part of the U.S. And there's a certain knowingness or attitude that I have that whatever comes my way, I can deal with it. I'll deal with it. What choice do we have anyway?
Yep.
Right? But if there's a deep knowingness that's just, things come my way, I'll deal with it. Rather maybe didn't sometimes, right? But I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but
absolutely are, because that's one of the things we talk about. Also, our dads, it's not just the negative. It's easy in life to look at the negative, But our dads, you know, we've got to credit them for some like the amazing positive skills that they set as our baseline as well. And that's one thing that we're just empowering dads, that we do the best we can. You know, it's not about self-judgment here. This is the other facilitator in our course. He talks about that we're, as a parent, you're living an experiment in consciousness. And if you can take an experimental view, as a scientist would, you make choices and hypotheses and you live it. And then you're like, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll change that based on the result I get. So we're wanting dads to experiment in their parenting without judging based on their previous baselining.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Perfect.
Amazing. You know what, just finally, Rollin, as you said, with dads out there, you know, the HeartMath Institute has so many amazing tools. You know, for someone starting out down this path and wanting to learn more about the HeartMath Institute, obviously the website would be a great place to start. Is there anywhere in particular you think would be great resources for them?
Yeah, well, HeartMath.org, there's two HeartMaths, but HeartMath.org is the institute. We're the nonprofit that do a lot of the education programs. In fact, we have some awesome resources for kids. I mean, right now we happen to be in the middle of the pandemic time, so we've given away one of our key programs for younger children to help them really learn some of these basic self-regulation skills. And it's actually an awesome thing for parents to do with their kids. We also have board games that parents can play with younger kids called Wild Ride to the Heart that actually helps both parents and kids develop these things. So there's some awesome resources, but there's we're also giving away a 90-minute video course that has a lot of the core HeartMath techniques called the HeartMath Experience. So that's free right now. These are both, you know, fairly expensive programs. It was going to be our revenue, you know, for the year, but you know, it was the right thing to do, was to give it away. And I mean, we just crossed, I think, over 110,000 families have now downloaded the program for kids. So that was
amazing.
That was great. And HeartMath Experience, I think, is getting close to that as well. So those are free resources. I also am a co-author on a book. I'm the first author on a book called Transforming Stress for Teens. And it's, I think, a great book for parents to read. I mean, it was written kind of in a language for teens, but I actually am hearing from adults that they actually like it the best of all of our books.
Yes.
It's not just for, you know, teens. But it's just written a little friendlier language.
Yep.
So that's I think a great resource for parents as well, really of any age. And there are many others, but
amazing. I know personally, I love my HRV monitor. You know, what it brought to me as a male was the tangibility to what I was doing. And I think that's pretty key when you're starting down a path of understanding what coherence is to be able to see some data that backs up what you're doing. And then once you get that feeling, you don't need to, you know, be plugged in all the time to understand it.
Yeah, it's an awesome tool. I mean, it really is. I mean, you know, for the male types out here in the world who don't like this touchy-feely stuff, well, the Navy SEALs are big users of it, because it's really about how do we really maintain our composure, you know, when the blank's hitting the fan, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, coherence is not just fluffy stuff. It's really about intelligence of how do we really maintain our composure and manage our energy as we navigate life from a much more intelligent perspective.
Well, that actually leads me to a question that I forgot to ask earlier. And it, you know, a lot of the guys on this program are going to obviously love professional sports. You know, we all watch guys or people in general that are performing at their peak levels. And I've always been, sorry?
They're coherent.
They're coherent. And that was what I'm fascinated about, because even though they're systems of the body, you know, they could be pumping, you know, all sorts of great chemicals through their system as they're performing at that high level. But that flow state, you know, that has to be a very high level of coherence, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is. And there's actually studies that show that. And, you know, coherence isn't just with us in our bodies. We, in our own systems, we actually talk about in our research 3 categories of coherence: personal, like which we've been talking about today, social, and global. So social would easily apply to a sports team. I mean, it's obvious when you see, especially in team sports, obviously, where something magical happens and there's a synchronization, like almost an unseen field connecting all the players that happens when they really rise above that obvious shift. And that's really what we mean by team coherence. In fact, we have a new training program just on, a lot of coaches are going through that certification. How do we create that sync, if you will, and that coherence so just like we got parts in our body, if you're a team, you're all individuals that are part of something greater. And those parts have to be in sync and well in a harmonious order for that greater thing to emerge out of that those parts. So that's coherence at a team level.
And so I guess the family is a team, right? And
sure, it can be. And we also work with a lot of professional sports outlets as well.
Yes.
Who get this, especially the team sports, but also Olympic sports as well.
Yes.
It's getting our own coherence to maximize our own performance. But if we get all the team members coherent and then coherent together, so that's when magic happens.
Right. And so with that magic, because that's what we're trying to create in our household, right? Like a high performing family team. We also talk about the concepts of, say, resonance and entrainment. And we're trying to empower dads to understand that they can be that coherent force within a family. Maybe you could speak quickly to entrainment within that team dynamic.
Yeah. Well, right. It's, if we're in physics, when we talk about entrainment, these are like kind of a common example. I mean, it's a lot more complex, but you got pendulums on clocks, right? That they can literally, well, they do actually. The guy named Kristen Huygens first discovered this back in 18 something or other, who was a clock builder, that you get all the pendulums swinging different ways, that you come back an hour later and they're all swinging in sync with each other. So that was typically what we would mean by entrainment. They've all synchronized to the same rhythm. Of course, that's not the way we mean it in our bodies, because things are doing different rhythms, but yet in a synchronized and harmonious order. But in that clock example, the clock with the biggest pendulum, the most weight, the most power, sets the dominant frequency, right? The others entrain to it. So it's kind of that way in families as well. I would say, I don't want to be stereotypical here, but in a lot of families, the dad, the male, is using that dominant energetic energy, but not always. I mean, I know plenty of moms that,
yes,
run the show too, but
yeah, well, we discussed that. I know, and this was just my personal experience, may not be everybody's, but when my daughter was born, my wife goes into a bit more of a primitive brain. It's more of I'm keeping baby alive. The focus is very much on the child. So I took the opportunity and responsibility to be that big pendulum in our household as far as creating more space and heart-centered emotions. She's already in a very heart-centered emotion with the baby. However, when the stresses of life do come, we want dads to understand they can be that big pendulum and they can entrain the rest of the family into higher levels of coherence.
Absolutely. And I would say critically, I mean, that's what ultimately creates, I'll call it the energetics, but that feeling, real feeling, it gets imprinted in the brains of both mom and babies and children as well, of safety, which is probably the most important thing, through childhood, is really having that feeling of security and safety.
Amazing, Rollin. This has been truly enlightening for me, and I'm sure all the men on the course are going to get so much value out of this. So thank you for your time. And I'm going to post the links as well to heartmath.org so that anybody that's looking to go and tap into these brilliant resources can go and sign up and get full benefit of all the amazing research that you've done.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you so much.